Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Lotus Chat Worldwide. And today we have Jen. Say hi, Jen.
Everyone.
Yes. And today we thought we're going to do something on a communication topic. So we're going to delve into responding versus reacting. That's a beautiful topic from Jen. So I'm going to let her kickstart by maybe you want to talk about what's the difference between responding and reacting? What do you think?
So yes, responding versus reacting. So the way I think about the two words is one is emotion based or comes from an emotion based, fear based type of feeling, and the other comes slowly, meaning when you are responding, you consider what the topic is, what is going on, you consider like the pros and the cons of what someone is saying, you consider you get more into that. Let me slowly come to whether it's a decision or slowly come to an opinion or slowly do XYZ rather than coming from that emotional fear-based kind of state. What do you think, Zian? How would you define responding versus reacting?
Okay, just so that I'm clear what you're saying, the emotion base is the one that's talking about responding, right?
Well, the emotion base would be the reacting state. So when you react, it's more like emotional response to a situation, while the responding state would be like responding in more of a thoughtful, slower way, like actually listening and considering like what the person's saying, considering,
Yes.
pros and cons, considering other things versus not just only your emotions. You take
Yes, that totally makes sense because when you talk about reacting, it's like a reaction. So that felt so instant, and hence it could be emotional because sometimes when people say something, it triggers something in you, hence you react with an emotion. Whereas I think respond is you probably think about it for a bit, pause for a while, have some thoughtful thoughts about it before wanting to say something. So to me, that the key difference here is the time, the space that you allow. One, you respond within 0.5 seconds, and you react in 0.5 seconds. The other, you probably respond in 5 seconds. I don't know, just saying. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree, Zian, on what you said. I think it's like that response time that comes when I'm gonna say like a trigger. Like if something triggers you about what something that somebody said or did, and you just go into that reactive mode where you feel you are being attacked in any way, or you feel
Yeah.
some type of fear coming on, or you feel that the other person is doing XYZ to you or saying something about you. That's that reactive kind of like split second. I'm just gonna say what I'm gonna say right now. I really am not gonna take anyone into account. But you start just really getting into that kind of emotion type of,
Yes.
rather than responding, right? Where you're like thinking, okay, let me listen to what this person's saying. Okay, let me ask some questions to clarify. Let me see why this person's coming across this way. That's when you're going into the response stage of like
Yes.
everything, the bigger picture.
Yeah,
So
and I have to say, when you describe everything you just did, the first person that came into my mind is my husband.
oh,
I noticed when I talk to him, I definitely react. So that's probably something that, I need to work on, and I'm sure I do. It's, maybe sometimes, as husband and wife, you have less patience, you have less tolerance, and hence everything he says sometimes triggers a lot of things in me. And I go like, what? And I start like reacting and being emotional. So versus if I were to be with my clients. When I'm with my clients, I tend to put on a professional hat. So when you have a professional hat, I allow a little bit of space to be in there. And as I like grow in this career, I even like now tell myself I do not need to have all the answers. I used to start, when I was first in my training and coaching, I used to think, oh my God, everyone's expecting an answer from me, but I don't have an answer. So sometimes I go like, I'll think about it. Whatever you said, that's an interesting point. I'll think about it. I don't have to have an immediate answer. So psychologically for me is when I respond, the inner story that I have in my mind is I don't need to have an answer immediately. I get to think about it and then I get to come back to you.
Ooh, I love what you said. Let me
Yeah.
think about it and I'll get back to you. Absolutely. I think sometimes we come somehow conditioned to think like the minute somebody asks us a question or
Mhm.
the minute somebody comes at us in some way that we automatically have to have like a response. And
Yeah.
the response may not always come from that thoughtful state of mindfulness, of being mindful of the situation, mindful of the person, mindful
Definitely.
of where the person's coming from, because sometimes we might not know the whole story. One of the
Of
things that I've
course.
realized is that there are people who might not be having a good day in that day, right? That you might come across who might be reacting because they are not having a really good day or because something happened, and their reaction to you might not even have anything to do with you. It might have to do with something that triggered them or that happened to them. And sometimes that's where people can react and the communication might get a bit muddled and nobody
Mm,
really knows why so and so got angry. And then you end up being like thinking like when you finally find out the reason why they're angry, you're like, well, you could have just said so, like it, I then there's that famous line, don't take everything personally. Like
correct. I
my
love
family
that.
told me, they're like, don't take anything personally because you never know where somebody's coming from in that day,
Yeah.
And so Deanne, since we talk about some examples for us personally, when have there been instances where we've reacted and not responded? Like you said about you and your husband,
Mm.
like when has there been another instance?
Actually, when we're talking about this topic on communication, I wanted to kind of sideline a little bit and emphasize the difference between responding and reacting when we do emails and messages. So
Mm,
messages, I'm talking about WhatsApp because that's the platform that I use. It could be any other thing for you guys, but so for like emails, I notice reacting is sometimes when I read something on email, I'm like, oh my God, like it just triggers something in me, and I tend to want to reply immediately because I want to get it sorted so that I can move on to the next email, right? So the difference for me is that reaction is when I read a very uncomfortable email and I write everything I want to write. And I learn to respond by schedule send that email. So,
mm,
in Gmail, that's a button that says schedule
yes.
send, which means you don't need to send it right now. You send it tomorrow at 8 a.m. so that you have that space, that mental space to think about it. And there were so many instances that I either rewrite the email or I deleted the email. So that to
Mhm.
me is the difference in terms of that email, like whether you react immediately by replying immediately or you respond by letting yourself some mental space and then schedule send it on another day.
Ooh,
Yeah,
I'm
that's
glad you brought up
yeah.
emails. Gosh, I definitely can relate to that because I know there have been times when you get an email and you're like, well, the tone of it just
Yes.
comes across where you're like, wait a second, are they mad at me? Or wait a second, like, why are they coming at me
Yeah.
that way? And then you're
Yeah.
like thinking to yourself, okay, how, like for me, like I don't like reacting necessarily right away. I like thinking about, okay, where like why is this person writing this email to me, what is the reason behind it? And
Mm,
yeah, sometimes like I've caught like tone in emails where I'm like, okay, I wish they had worded it differently, but I cannot
mm.
change how they worded that to me. What I can do
Correct,
is
correct.
respond to it and be like, I understand XYZ is an issue, or I understand that there is this, something that came up and you would like to have me do this. Um, I do want to point out that I have XYZ
Yes,
and
yes.
and I have to really think about my words because I don't want to do what they did, right? In
Mm,
my the way I think about it, I am not going to respond in the way they did. I
mm,
am going to take it from a very thoughtful, very mature place and be like, okay,
mm.
let me take care of that. And then what I will do is I will talk to that person about it and say, you sent me that email a while back and there was a tone in it that I didn't really understand. Can you explain it to me? And
Yeah.
what's interesting is when you approach it that way, people will be like, oh my God, I didn't realize that I even wrote
Correct.
it that way. Like,
Yes,
like
yes.
felt that way. I was like, yeah, it came across a little bit harsh.
Yeah, yeah. And it's so interesting when you point out tone in emails because you can never really hear a tone, but then you kind of interpret whatever you read on a written email, but then you imagine that it's being said in that way, but maybe it's not, you know what I mean? So it's very
Yeah.
interesting that you pointed that out.
I had that happen multiple times when I was in the early days.
Yeah,
When I was in a long distance relationship where I was emailing my boyfriend, right? And there would be so many miscommunications in those emails where I would think like he was mad at me, or I would think that he
yeah,
was like starting to like feel a certain way, and then I'd
yes,
respond in emails like, "Oh, are we okay? Like, is everything all right? Like, what's going on?" Like, I know I catch myself on occasion thinking that someone else is having an issue or not feeling good. And
yes,
then they'll tell me like, no, Jen, I'm doing all right. Everything's good between us, like, and to all the
yes,
women out there who can relate to that, I know that sometimes we jump to conclusions. It's always best to just, as Zian said, take a step back, take a moment to respond and ask the questions like, hey, like anything you want to tell me, or
yeah,
that
and
I can you explain it to me? That's it.
yeah.
Yeah.
And the other mode of communication I wanted to talk about is that's an email, right? So on WhatsApp, I noticed the difference between responding and reacting. And I definitely love the latest feature where you get to edit your message. I was like, that's brilliant because sometimes when I receive messages, I go like, oh my God. And with messages, you tend to want to people tend to expect an immediate response and you tend to want to respond immediately versus an email. And hence, sometimes maybe the things that I say might not sound exactly what I could have sound. And hence, the editing button is brilliant because help me to respond. But what I also recently do is I react with an emoji rather than words, because when you react with an emoji, especially when it's a smiley or laughing emoji, it just kind of dampens the effect of a interesting conversation, if you know what I mean. Yeah.
Oh, I know what you mean, Zian. No, I think sometimes there are almost like we feel like instead of like, exacerbating something
Mm.
or like making things uncomfortable, the emoji was created just for that, to give that like those quick little picture answers to things versus going through a big old explanation or having that uncomfortable
Yeah.
conversation. You just send an emoji, right?
Yeah.
But imagine like, okay, and let's go ahead and get into like talking on the phone, right?
Yes.
One of the biggest things that I've noticed when it comes to responding and reacting is, like you said, Zian, one, we can't hear a person's voice in an email, but when you're on the phone, you can't see how a person is reacting to what you're saying. That's
Mm.
another thing, which can also cause us to go into that reactive state because we may not see that the person is actually being like, feeling a little bad that you're saying
Yeah.
those things. It might be feeling a little uncomfortable that you're saying those things on the phone.
Mm.
So
Mm.
all of these things are just things that we need to take into account when we talk about responding and reacting. And how responding is that just giving it that moment that Zian says
Yeah.
to just take a step back and I'll get back to you later, or let's ask some more questions, some clarifying questions,
Yeah. Yeah.
why do you feel that way? Why are you responding that way? I would like to get to the bottom of this and I want us to discuss this, as two mature adults. Let's go ahead and discuss it. I'm open to it.
Yeah.
And
And,
I have a question for you. A very
mm.
important for those of us that are not that type of person to say, hey, let's talk about it, and they are uncomfortable with quote unquote difficult conversations or
Mm.
conflict. How do we bridge that topic to have that conversation with someone?
I have no idea, but I what I did recently or recently learned is that I realized that I don't have to have the last say. So sometimes I notice in myself that whatever I say or whatever I react to the other person is because I don't know, why do I have to have the last say? I say something for the sake of saying it, just to have the last sentence from me, but then I recently realized I don't have to. So the conversation just ends there.
Mm,
Yeah.
I-
So with silence, in other words, I responded with silence.
mm,
Mm.
okay. So yeah, okay, so another thing too, like I know that a big part of responding also stems from the mindfulness topic that we
Yes.
talked about in other Lotus chats. So what are some tools and things that we can do to get us to a point where we're responding more rather than reacting to situations? Like what can we do? What are some tools or things that we can think about in the moment?
Mhm. I think definitely when someone is emotional, now I'm talking about face-to-face communication, right? When someone is emotional and they try to tell something, I guess a proper way to respond is just knowing that subtle difference that they're just trying to express their feelings, but then they don't need any solution, and hence just listening completely everything that is being said and everything that's not being said, which means the emotions that comes along with it. I think that's good enough by responding by allowing that space, giving that space for that person to say whatever they want to say. And then I think, if we have anything we need to say to respond to that, it gets to come later, like hours later or a day later. It doesn't have to happen during that emotional conversation.
Oh, I love it. You said give space and then you can return to the conversation later. That's beautiful. And I know we've discussed this in other Lotus Chat episodes about giving space and allowing the
Mm.
conversation to just happen, and when it can happen, when people's emotions are calm, when everybody's like, okay, let's revisit that. Absolutely. So beautiful way to just end this episode, Zian. With telling us that it is okay for us not to solve whatever conflict right then and there, and to give everybody go to their corners and we'll come back to it later, right?
Yes, that's right.
Do that. And another thing, in terms of, we don't want to pressure anyone into having a conversation they are still thinking about or still mulling over. And we definitely don't want to assume. So that's a big thing. Don't make assumptions until you two have a discussion.
Yeah.
So all of us out there who can relate to this, including myself, let us know down in the comment section below. Like this episode if you liked this topic that we just discussed, and we'll be talking about way more things on the channel in the future. So please, if this is your first time visiting us, we invite you to come back on either YouTube or on our Spotify podcast, which is another way that you can definitely listen to us. And we hope to see you again in our next episode, Zian. Thank you so much for being here, and we will see you all next time. You take care, guys.
Bye.